Hey folks, it's Cody Stoffer with Playmakers Corner, here to tell you about Code Red coaching. Competing in athletics means you've lifted the weights, you've watched film, and you've got the passion. Problem is, that's what everyone else in the state has done. Perfect your game by honing in on your mental performance with Code Red coaching. Whether you are a team or an individual, Code Red coaching has the tools to create mentally solid habits and set up you or your team for success. Find Code Red Coaching at coderedcoaching.com or call 720-979-1914 to learn more today. That's coderedcoaching.com or 720-979-1914 today. Now back to the show. Hello, listeners. It is your host for this episode, Cody Stoffer, back at the helm here, and we are going to do our awards here. So, the way that these awards work here is we have multiple different categories here. We got Coach of the Year, Newcomer of the Year, Defensive Playmaker of the Year, Offensive Playmaker of the Year, and Most Valuable Playmaker. And we have an entire media poll here that we go through that includes votes from myself, Coach V, Gino, Gideon, and Phoenix here of the podcast. We also get Anthony Garcia of Mile High Prep Report. Be sure to visit milehighprepreport.com and check out all of his articles and coverage of small town football. But without further ado, we do also utilize a Twitter poll as well that you, the fans, get to vote on. Those went live a couple weeks ago. We usually run them Sunday through Friday evening, and they also serve as our tiebreaker as well. So everybody gets a chance to vote on that. And then if there are any ties amongst our polls here, because we have 4 different nominees from each one, then that allows one of the Twitter polls to potentially serve as a tiebreaker. And that could be for any amount of percentage. So even if somebody doesn't win the Twitter poll, their Twitter votes can still be the tiebreaker in a tied matchup here. So that is very exciting. You count them all together, and this is, I want to say, the biggest poll that we've ever had. We have 7 total votes if you include the Twitter poll. And yeah, I think that this is just very exciting. We're very excited to have Phoenix voting on our awards this year, and it should make for a very exciting and dynamic kind of poll here. And we're going to read these out in various orders. Everybody has submitted their reasonings and votes as well. And then we're going to, just kind of read through them and then announce the winner of those said categories. And we start off with the nominations. At the very end of the show, we will also read out our All-Playmaker team. This is a team comprised of different positions. We have different position limits, I should say, is something that's important to note about that. And that was put together by just us here at PMC, Coach V, myself, Gideon, Gino, and Phoenix, who had a lot of conversations and discussions to put those together based off of how many players we want at each position. So, with all of that in mind, we can go ahead and get started with our very first category. So the very first category that I'm going to cover is actually going to be the leader of these teams and these players that we're probably going to be talking about quite a bit throughout the episode, and that is the Coach of the Year here. And we had 4 awesome nominees here, and I'm just going to give a little bit of background on each one as I kind of talk about where they came from, where they're at now, and where they're heading before we go over the votes. So the very first coach I'm going to talk about is Art Berlanga here, or Berlanga. Sorry if I am mispronouncing that. But Art here took a Forge Christian team that went 4-5 last year in 2A and had only a +2 point differential to a very impressive undefeated regular season here in 1A at 9-0 with an absurd point differential of over 450 points here. And, that unfortunately included a game there that I missed out on. But, Overall, this defense through the course of the regular season only gave up 19 points. They were dominant. They also have wins over 2A teams such as the Academy, Devlin, Kent Denver, Manitou Springs included in there. So, it was a pretty big year for this team that just cruised right through the regular season and had a big turnaround utilizing players that were already on the roster and maximizing the talent that they already had. So that is Art Berlanga of Forge Christian here out of Arvada High School, and that is one of our first candidates here. Moving along here, we will be talking about Levi Kramer here, who last season went 6-3 here in the 1A level here, losing to Scott, which is a team in Kansas. They also lost to Holyoke and Lyman by pretty substantial things, and then finished the season 8-4 with a couple of playoff wins and a playoff loss in the semis. This season, however, was one of the best seasons in Ray High School history, as they also went undefeated here, 9-0, including huge league wins like a revenge win over Holyoke 49-7, and beating Lyman for the first time in 14 years. Yeah, you heard it here. The last time that Ray beat Lyman was in 2010 when they beat them in the playoffs here. And so this has been a huge season for the Ray Eagles here with Levi Kramer at the helm. Our next candidate here is going to be Carrie Overmiller here of Highland here. And Carrie inherited a 5-5 squad that did make the playoffs last year, but unfortunately did not make a ton of noise here. And they just kind of struggled against some better teams, losing big to teams like Ray, Wellington, Kent Denver University, and playing some other teams really, really close. So that was the Huskies last year. This year, they are 7-2 heading into the postseason here, with only a very narrow loss to Wiggins and Platte Valley to mar their overall record. But one of the most explosive offenses that Highland has had in quite some time. For context, they scored 253 points last year. This year, 383 points and a way more stout defense to boot as well. Carrie Overmiller, obviously, overseeing the Highland success here in his first year, I want to say, at the helm. And our last candidate here is going to be Kyle Forster of Centauri here. Now, Centauri last season did go 7-2, which was pretty impressive here. And this year they went 8-1. So very mild increase in wins here, but overall have just looked a lot more dominant with some really quality wins in between there as well. They have notable wins this year, such as a nearly 30-point win over Meeker to start the year, a 1-point win over 2A playoff team Pagosa Springs, a 6-point win over Buena Vista, and just a very dominant showing in league over multiple opponents, and overall are looking to make a deeper run this season. Now, talking about the votes here, we're going to go ahead and talk about the Twitter poll here first that had 302 votes. If you ever want to get your voice listened to as far as awards go, please go ahead and head to our Twitter/X and follow us at Playmaker Corner and vote on our polls. Right now, we actually have our 2A polls that are up and running, so go ahead and vote on those. But I digress here. For the polls from bottom to top, we had Carrie Overmiller, who received 2% of the vote, Kyle Forster, who received 9% of the vote, and in second place, which also announces first at the same time, second was Levi Kramer at 42%, and Art Berlanga here at 47%. Narrowly wins this one, but wins the Twitter poll here as the Coach of the Year, according to you, the fans. So thank you so much for coming out and voting, and congratulations to Art on winning the Fan Poll of the Year on Coach of the Year. But let's go ahead and see what the other fellas at the pod had to say. Now, let's go ahead and start with Coach V here, and his vote is going to be for Levi Kramer, saying, quote, Ray is number one for a reason, and they won out in the toughest 1A league in Colorado. This Ray team could have folded after a tough state loss 2 years ago, but instead they've risen to the occasion as the team to beat. This team has so many ways they can beat you, and that is in part thanks to the scheming of Coach Kramer and this staff, end quote. Now, I'm going to make things just a little interesting here, and I'm going to actually increase Art's lead here by 1 vote by voting Berlanga here. Look, doing the season preview, I felt like this Forge Christian team are looking at who did the season preview. This Forge Christian team was going to be good. They had talent on the roster, but I do not know if 9-0 was necessarily in the cards in their first year moving down from 2A to 1A, but they did so in such dominating fashion. Even if 9-0 was in the cards here, I think that they rose up to the occasion. They played very, very well so far this season. They've utilized all of their athletes in creative ways where they can kind of take turns seeing who pulls and picks you apart in a game. And so I'm going to cast my vote for Art Berlanga of Forge Christian. Moving along here and tying it up is going to be Gino here, voting Levi Kramer, saying, quote, Coach Kramer has built an extremely tough program at Ray. They played in the toughest league in the classification, but still no team has come within 4 scores against Ray this season. Dominance like that shows to me that Ray is going to be a problem for years to come, and that's why I'm going with Coach Kramer, end quote. And with Anthony of Mile High Prep Report, let's go ahead and see what he has to say, and his vote is going to be cast for Levi Kramer, providing a 1-vote lead here for Ray's coach here. Must just be impressed with the dominance he has shown over the course of the season and what this Eagle team has come to accomplish. Thank you, Anthony, and be sure, once again, to check out Mile High Prep Report for all of your up-to-date information on small town football here. Now, moving along here and putting this basically out of reach is going to be Gideon here, saying, quote, Coach of the Year is tough because this one is between the man who developed the top talents in 1A for 4 years and who has made this Ray squad a 2-headed monster, or the one who made Forge Christian's 3-headed monster. Ultimately, I'm going with Ray. Pushing hard through the adversity that the Eagles have, losing year after year in the brightest lights has to hurt. I know that the Fury have gone through adversity as well, but the drop from 2A to 1A does admittedly help. Honestly, though, I wouldn't be mad if either won it, but Ray is in a much superior league and beat better teams by more. And, quote, we're passing it off to Phoenix here, who's just going to be the cherry on top, voting for Levi Kramer, saying, quote, the best coaches in 1A football are the ones that can establish a foundation despite their region or where they are playing and are able to create perfection in the midst of adversity, and Kramer has done just that for Ray. The top seed in 1A, undefeated record overall, and in the best league in 1A, and coaching some of the best players in 1A football to get there is not an easy feat to accomplish. A lot of respect for Ray to be where they are. And with all the votes casted here, we're going to go ahead and just do a final count with Coach V voting for Levi Kramer of Ray, myself voting for Art Berlanga here of Forge Christian, Gino voting for Levi Kramer, Gideon voting for Levi Kramer, Phoenix voting for Levi Kramer, Anthony voting for Levi Kramer, and shout out to the fans who did crown the fan vote to Art Berlanga here. But your 1A Coach of the Year in 2024 for the Playmakers Corner is going to be Levi Kramer of the Ray Eagles. Moving along to our next category here, and that is going to be Newcomer of the Year. This goes to the most outstanding freshman in a classification according to regular season stats, impact, and just overall view of these squads here. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce the nominees for Newcomer of the Year. Starting off with Manny Giron of Monte Vista here. Manny, in this season for the Pirates, posted 41 tackles, 3 for loss, a sack, 2 hurries, and a fumble recovery. Monte Vista, for those who are unfamiliar here, had a landmark year, making sure that they made the playoffs here. And, Manny was obviously a part of that. Overall, Monte Vista this year went 7-2, including making a push for a league title with a late win over Centauri by 10 points, and only lost to 2A playoff teams in Alamosa and Pagosa Springs. Manny, obviously, with those 41 tackles, 3 for loss, and a sack, was getting into that rotation and disrupting things for the opposing teams, as this Pirate defense only allowed 161 points all season. Moving along to our next nominee here, it's going to be Tyler Tanner of Platte Canyon here. This defensive monster here for Platte Canyon, was up this leaderboard here with 34 total tackles, including 2 for loss, as well as a pass deflection and an interception at the safety spot, but also obviously being rolled down into the box for this Platte Canyon team that, did not make the playoffs and struggled a little bit, but it at least gives them something to look forward to when they start to build for the future here. Tyler had some of his best games in the defensive category against the likes of Ellicott in a win, where he had 8 tackles, including 1 for loss, and in their other win of the season over Denver Christian, he had 6 tackles and 1 for loss as well. And in a close loss to Prospect Ridge Academy, he did log that 1 interception. So that is Tyler Tanner of Platte Canyon. Our next nominee here is Valentino Fuentes here of the Pinnacle Academy. He's actually our leading tackle for loss guy here, at least on the defensive side of the ball in this category here, with 5 tackles for loss on 23 total tackles, a sack, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. Now, while the Pinnacle is still looking to capitalize off of the young talent that they have, obviously having a guy that you can build around on that defensive side of the ball like Valentino is going to be major for this team heading forward. And so we got to applaud Valentino's season here for this squad. Our last nominee here is Camden Taha of the Lyman Badgers here. And if that sounds familiar, it's because his brother was running things here a few years ago. When we actually first started our podcast here, Corey Taha was one of the first players that we ever covered. And, Camden is trying to keep it in the family here with a solid season on offense here, getting 80 carries for 502 yards and 5 rushing scores, along with another 130 receiving yards as well here, and another 2 touchdowns to boot, not to mention his impact on defense, where he logged 56 tackles and 5 for loss, along with forcing 2 fumbles. Some of his more notable games on the defensive side of the ball is against Ray. He logged a season-high 2 tackles for loss on 8 total tackles. And against Buena Vista, he had the most solo tackles of his season with 5, along with another 5 assisted tackles for a 10-tackle game. Now, on the offensive side of the ball, he had a big game against Flatirons Academy. I would probably call that his coming out party, as he ran for over 100 yards as well as a pair of scores here, and also scored against the likes of Bennett, Holyoke, and Yuma here in their regular season performances. Lyman on the season here ultimately went 7-2, and this was a very young team, so it's no surprise that a young player would make their way onto our rotation here. I'm going to go ahead and cast my vote first here, cutting ahead in line here, and I'm going to vote for Camden Taha. I know the caliber that is in the genetics of this family here, but for a player to have both an offensive and defensive impact that Taha had, it's a little bit more rare here than some of these other cats here who still had very good contributions, but just not to the same degree, I would say, on both sides of the ball that Taha had. So while there's going to be a lot of great defensive studs here who made some very large impacts here, I have to give it to Camden Taha out of Lyman for the very first vote in this award poll. Moving along, though, we are going to go ahead and check in on Anthony Garcia of Mile High Prep Report, who, does a very good job covering that western slope and gets an inside and up close look here. And I think that's going to be a huge part of his vote for Manny Giron here. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, Manny, but Manny here of Monte Vista here. Important on that defensive side of the ball. Anthony gets that front row seat to players like him, and obviously he passed the eye test en route to winning Anthony's vote from Mile High Prep Report on this Newcomer of the Year award. Moving along, we're going to go ahead and flip over to Phoenix here in his first year of voting on these awards, but plenty of experience in small town football, having grown up in Bennett, so he's very familiar with a handful of these teams, and his vote is going to be casted for Camden Taha, where he says, quote, brings an undeniable impact to a Lyman team that had a lot of self-reflecting that needed to be done this season. Despite some ups and downs the team may have gone through, Taha brought the boom on the ground and on defense, as a freshman nonetheless, end quote. So now that puts Taha right back ahead here in this voting here. We're going to pan over to Gideon here, somebody else who went to a smaller school here and somebody who's connected to Phoenix, met them through CSU here, and see what his thoughts are. And his vote is going to be for Camden Taha here, saying, quote, Taha led the Badgers in rushing while also being in their top tier of tacklers. On a team like Lyman, making impact as a freshman is quite impressive, but especially on the number 3 seed has me pleasantly surprised, end quote. Putting Taha back up by 2 votes now is Gideon here with a vote for Taha out of Lyman. However, you, the fans, voted here 200 total votes on this poll here. 5% going to Valentino Fuentes, 6% going to Tyler Tanner. Shout out to those nominees. But the winner of this poll that also tells us second place is going to be Manny Giron here, who closes that gap. He wins by a very impressive 51% of the poll to Taha's just 38% here. Like I said, on 200 votes, that means he got over 100 votes for this place on the list here. Shout out to Manny and shout out to you, the fans, who have just crowned Manny the 1A Newcomer of the Year winner for the fan vote and have also closed the gap here to a 3-2 deficit. Basically making this next vote the most important one here, and it's going to be for Camden Taha here, saying, quote, being a top 2 rusher and tackler on a perennial powerhouse like Lyman is more than enough for me to give Taha the vote here. He's making clear that he's going to be a key contributor for Lyman for years to come. And Coach V cannot agree anymore, saying, quote, the brother of Lyman legend Corey has begun to make a name for himself on both sides of the ball. His two-way ability is what sold me, as he is somebody who has taken on a significant role for this Lyman team. So, with all of that being accounted for here, shout out to the other nominees, Tyler Tanner, as well as our other nominee from the Pinnacle, Valentino Fuentes, but it's going to be Manny Giron here, who wins the Fan Newcomer of the Year poll, as well as Anthony from Mile High Prep Reports award vote. But the award winner on behalf of Playmakers Corner is going to be Camden Taha, receiving all of the Playmakers Corner votes here, being impressed with his impact on a very good Lyman squad as a freshman on both sides of the ball. Congratulations to Camden Taha and all the other nominees, but Camden Taha is your 2024 1A Newcomer of the Year. And now we got Defensive Playmaker of the Year here with 4 awesome nominees once again that include Brogan Palmer of Highland, Machowan Puga of Prospect Ridge Academy, Dante Viahill of Forge Christian, and Jonathan Thompson of Yuma. So let's go ahead and talk about Brogan Palmer's impact here. As stated earlier, this was a very successful season for Highland, 7-2, an improvement from last season, and Brogan Palmer's sophomore to junior jump was a huge part of that. At the time of the ending of the regular season here, he was the sack leader in 1A football, posting 11 sacks on top of 58 tackles, but a really insane 24 tackles for loss, not to mention 40 hurries, 7 forced fumbles, 2 recoveries, and 8 pass deflections. Just an absolute game wrecker at his absurd frame here. He is fantastic off the edge. He's somebody that you should probably double if you're trying to mitigate his impact here, and is a huge reason that the Huskies took a step forward this season in total wins, as well as a little bit of impact on offense. But just an awesome frame here in Alt, Colorado. Moving along here, speaking of teams that made a huge jump, that includes Prospect Ridge Academy. Prospect Ridge was one of the more woeful teams over the past few years here. This squad has struggled to find wins, no matter where that has been here. And so for them to get a high-impact player like Puga here was imperative to their success this season here, as he was an absolute monster in this go-around here, posting a pretty absurd stat line for a defender who was also on offense nonstop. He had 40 tackles, 6 for loss, but then an impressive 10.5 sacks, as well as a couple of fumble recoveries and a couple of forced fumbles as well. Puka here's notable game is definitely Jefferson, where despite the talent level here of a Jefferson squad, it was still a very close win for Prospect Ridge Academy, pulling it out 24-22. And I bet that does not happen if Puka does not register 5 sacks for over 50 yards lost, as well as register a couple of hurries as well. He's been able to get in the backfield and terrorize teams all year, notching sacks against the likes of Denver West as well, Roaring Fork, as well as just a couple of other squads here to a double-digit sack season and a very high total tackle season at 40 with 6 for loss. Like I said, this Prospect Ridge Academy squad has struggled to find wins in the past here, but was definitely helped out by a defense that stepped up a lot more compared to usual. They finished the season 4-5, which is one of their best records since coming in here, including snapping a losing streak that dated all the way back to 2022, where their last win was on September 8th against Timnath. So huge ups to Prospect Ridge Academy and Machowan Puga here for his Defensive Playmaker of the Year candidacy. Moving along here, we got Dante V. Hill. You already know that we're going to have some Forge Christian athletes here because of their big step and their undefeated season. And Dante V. Hill was imperative to that, being a huge tackle leader here in this squad here. 76 tackles as well as 7 for loss, but a very impressive 4 sacks as well as an interception and a forced fumble. Just an overall menace from sideline to sideline out of Dante V. Hill here. And when you look at some of his notable games, you got to look at the Academy, where he had 2 TFLs, as well as Flatirons Academy, where he posted the same. And then some of his high tackle numbers, like Wiggins, in a 41-0 statement win to start their season, he posted 10. Against Devlin, a 2A program, he had 15. And Flatirons Academy, he had 13 total tackles, not to mention registering 2 sacks against Kent Denver, which ends up being critical to absolutely crippling Kent Denver's season and keeping Forge Christian's season chumming right along here. Congratulations to Dante V. Hill on his nomination for Defensive Playmaker of the Year. And our last nominee here, but certainly not the least notable here, got to be Jonathan Thompson, who, while being an absolute menace on the offensive side of the ball here with over 1,000 yards of offense and 300 yards of passing, his defensive stature here loomed big in this year for Yuma here, posting 8 tackles for loss on the season and being the leading tackler on this list with 83 tackles, as well as a sack, 2 fumble recoveries, a forced fumble, 2 pass deflections, and 4 interceptions, being the leading interceptor out of players on this list. Huge ups to his pick against Torrington that ended up being one of the biggest plays of the season as they got an out-of-state win 8-3, not to mention a 3 interception performance against Roaring Fork here on the season as well. 115 interception return yards to go with that sack as well that he got against Torrington, just doing everything that is asked of him as Yuma makes the playoffs at 4-5, and it is entirely thanks to Jonathan Thompson's efforts. So let's go ahead and read through here. This is a thrilling one that is going to go down to the wire as far as votes go. Now, we got Defensive Playmaker of the Year vote for Dante V. Hill, courtesy of Coach V, saying, quote, "This came down to V. Hill and Jonathan Thompson, as both have had excellent defensive seasons against the best competition. I ultimately went with V. Hill with the number of solid 2A programs he had good games against," end quote. So that is one vote for Dante V. Hill out of Forge Christian High School. Moving along to Gino here, he's going to cast a vote for Brogan Palmer, spicing it up a little bit, saying, quote, "From the looks of it, Brogan Palmer has been the most impactful defensive player on a very good playoff team. 7 forced fumbles is just flat out insane. Alongside over 20 TFLs and 11 sacks, Highland has been a top defensive unit in the state, and Palmer is a massive part of that." Gideon is going to echo this sentiment, casting a vote for Brogan Palmer, saying, quote, "Ever since his freshman year, Palmer has been a beast for the Highland Huskies. I know that their secondary is good, but I'm honestly not sure that this team wins much in that schedule without him. It's hard to argue with 11 sacks, 24 TFLs, and 7 forced fumbles, but it is actually pretty close between himself and V-Hill. Both are good players, but Forge also has Uli Tufoya, who I think is an all-PMC defensive end. I'm not sure who else on Highland's defense I can say that about. So, end quote. That is 2 votes for Brogan Palmer here and 1 vote for Dante V-Hill. And I'm actually going to spice it up by throwing in Jonathan Thompson here. He's somebody whose film I have had the pleasure of taking a look at, and he's somebody who has sent us highlights as well. And he is impressed in every single facet of the game. And, I think that the big step forward for him to take, we knew what he was capable of on offense, but his defensive strides and being able to play in the box more aggressively, showing a very high level of physicality, getting in the backfield as well as notching interceptions. I mean, that's a 3-level defender that is really, really hard to find. And I think that's what his future would look like on the next level here. And if I'm a recruiting coordinator, I'm definitely looking at Jonathan Thompson here out of Yuma to add to my class of 25 recruiting. Keeping it going here, Phoenix is actually going to agree with me, saying, quote, he gets my vote for being an all-around player for Yuma, and it shows on defense. He's already the leader of the offense as their QB and playing in a very tough league in 1A, while putting up the numbers he did, having over 80 tackles and 4 interceptions, is solid and deserves recognition, end quote. So, now making it really interesting, that's 2 votes for Brogan Palmer, 2 votes for Jonathan Thompson, and the 1 vote for Coach V is about to be matched by Anthony Garcia of Mile High Prep Report. This voting is going to go down to the wire, but Anthony here is going to cast his vote for Dante V-Hill out of Forge Christian. Coach V obviously made a great point as far as who he's doing it against, and the stats are still very, very impressive. But what makes it insane is that we need to go to the fan poll to figure out who's going to win this, as we have a 3-way tie right now, and you, the fans, are going to help decide who wins our Defensive Playmaker of the Year here for the 1A level in 2024. Now, shout out to Machao and Puga, who did end up placing 3rd in this poll at 25% of the vote on 409 votes. So getting about 100 there. Shout out to Puga here and his awesome season. Now, I almost feel like I'm reading off the first one who doesn't get it, but instead, I'm going to read off out of the 409 votes, the winner of the fan poll, as well as the Playmakers Corner 1A 2024 Defensive Playmaker of the Year is Dante V-Hill out of Forge Christian, the Fury display, and they come out and vote once again. This is the second poll so far that a Forge Christian Fury representative has taken home the hardware, and Dante V-Hill does it for all the marbles at 47%, outpacing Jonathan Thompson's 26% and Brogan Palmer's 2%. Highland community, go ahead and get following us on Twitter so that way you have a bit more of your voice heard. But shout out to the Forge Christian community. 409 votes is no easy task here for a Defensive Playmaker of the Year candidacy, and Dante racked up almost 200 of those votes. So congratulations to Dante V-Hill on being our 1A 2024 Defensive Playmaker of the Year, with 2nd place going to Jonathan Thompson, 3rd to Brogan Palmer, and 4th to Machao and Puga. Shout out to these 4 candidates, though, as they had very impressive seasons and are must shout out guys on the 1A level for this season. And now we got our Offensive Playmaker of the Year. We had the stone walls on the other side on that last segment. Now we got the explosive fireworks here over on this side of the football here, and we got some studs here. We got 2 quarterbacks and 2 running backs here to talk about. The very first one being the quarterback here is Jace Velasquez of Colorado Springs Christian, leading this team to an 11 seed on the heels of 1,500 passing yards, along with nearly 400 rushing yards here. Actually going to be enough for a 1,900-yard season, and 21 total touchdowns, 12 passing, 9 rushing, to just 4 picks here to lead Colorado Springs Christian through a pretty tough schedule here, honestly, that included a handful of top 1A talent as well as top 2A talent as well. Some of his notable performances include in a 27-24 win over Florence, going 13 of 20 for 181 yards, 2 touchdowns to just 1 pick. And in some other games here, he had a 4-touchdown performance against Dolores Huerta Prep in their first season here. He had a huge rushing game here against the likes of Platte Canyon High School, going for 93 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. Against Lyman here, despite losing this game, he had no turnovers and 4 total touchdowns to go with 380 yards from scrimmage, 280 passing, 100 rushing, and 2 touchdowns in each category apiece. That is Jace Velasquez, one of the top offensive playmakers in the state. Moving on to another quarterback here. This one is none other than Noah Martin of Peyton High School. Now, Peyton narrowly missed out on the postseason here, but Noah had a very solid senior season, going for 900 passing yards, as well as 13 touchdowns to just 4 picks, and another 600 rushing yards and 10 rushing touchdowns, making for 23 total touchdowns on the season for Noah Martin's senior campaign here, as well as 1,500 total yards to boot, helping keep this offense balanced and unpredictable throughout their performance this season. Another name on this list that should sound familiar, as he's been in Defensive Playmaker of the Year consideration, Most Valuable Playmaker consideration, Offensive Playmaker of the Year consideration, and that is Samuel Meisner of Ray here, who ran for 1,131 yards, as well as 22 rushing touchdowns to go with 128 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns here. Sam is the complementary piece of this Ray offense, but is also somebody who has to do this on not a full gas tank, as defensively he is heavily relied on at the linebacker spot to keep that Ray Eagle defense chugging along here. So Sam here, huge impact on not even like fully focused offense here, is Ray's representative for the Offensive Playmaker of the Year. And last but not least here, we got Eli Schuconnect here out of Buena Vista. He went for over 1,000 rushing yards as well, with 1,025, as well as 12 rushing touchdowns, 58 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown, not to mention 120 kickoff return yards here. This season, he had some pretty special games against the likes of Salida and our friends over in Kersey here, Platte Valley High School, going for over 200 yards and 2 scores in both of those games. Very impressive starts, but it's not like he really disappeared against quality opponents like Centauri, where he still had 106 rushing yards and a score, and still averaged 5 yards per carry against the likes of Lyman. He also had a very massive game against Peyton, as well as Colorado Springs Christian, talking about some of the other candidates here, where across those 2 games, he ran for 6 touchdowns and over 400 yards, well, nearly 400 yards here, 388, close enough though, in a very impressive close to the season and league title run for Eli Schuconnect here. Now let's go ahead and talk about the votes here. Going to start with y'all, the fans here, where this was actually the most percentage points that somebody won in, and that was Sam Meisner here, garnering 75% of the vote on 175 votes. Not our biggest poll here, but boy, did Ray show out for this voting here, as, like I said, they racked up 175 votes for Sam, or out of 175 votes, Sam got 75% of them. Second place was Noah Martin at 17%. Third place was Jace Velasquez at 6%. And in the final spot, Eli got 2% of the vote. So shout out to Sam Meisner, who is the fan Offensive Playmaker of the Year winner. Now let's go ahead and see if anything changes here for the rest of the squad. We're going to climb up the list here and go to Anthony of Mile High Prep Report, who is going to cast his vote for Sam Meisner as well here. That 1,100-yard performance just has to be something to remember. And Ray, mind you, has as well Anthony's Coach of the Year here. So he's been keeping eyes on that Ray squad and has voted for Sam Meisner as the Offensive Playmaker of the Year. The Meisner tidal wave continues as Phoenix says, quote, undeniably the top offensive player in 1A football. The kid has over 1,100 rushing yards this season and 22 touchdowns on the ground in what has been a perfect season thus far for Ray. He is a big reason for that, and a big reason why Ray has scored at least 40 points in all but one game this season, end quote. So Phoenix here, with his vote for Sam Meisner, is trying to put this out of reach as he has a 3-0 lead over other candidates. And Gideon is going to keep pouring it on. With his second place vote being Eli, he has Sam just ahead of him here saying, quote, Meisner is a beast. He performed consistently well against some of the best teams in the state and actually leads 1A in touchdowns outside of midcap. He is also the only player in the top 20 in Colorado for total touchdowns. He honestly could have made it at MVP too, but Meisner is just a beast. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. End quote. Gino here is going to try and make this unanimous here with only 2 votes remaining, voting for Meisner as well, saying, quote, Meisner has had another huge season this year, forming the best 1-2 punch in the state alongside MVP candidate Casey Midcap. His 22 rushing touchdowns easily leads 1A, and when you combine the fact that Ray has been the top offense in the state, this award is clearly Samuel Meisner's. Coach V now says, quote, he got it done on a Ray team that also has a D1 QB commit in midcap. Rushing for over 1,000 yards and 20-plus touchdowns in an offense with a lot of offensive weapons is definitely impressive. Add on the fact that he had 100-plus yards and multiple rushing touchdowns against the likes of Brush, Holyoke, Lyman, Yuma, and Wiggins, and that seals it, end quote. And speaking of sealing it, will I go ahead and cast the final vote to make this unanimous? Well, darn tootin' I'm going to. Sam Meisner is also my Offensive Playmaker of the Year candidate. I mean, everybody else kind of spoke for me as well, so it's kind of hard to disagree with the numbers, with the impact, with the performance, and with the record of Ray as Sam Meisner wins unanimous Offensive Playmaker of the Year on the 1A Colorado 2024 season level award here. Now, we're going to get a quick word from Junkyard Training, and then we're going to be right back with the Most Valuable Playmaker Award. Obviously, you want a trainer who can make you stronger and faster with the work you put in, but what about a trainer who can help you rehab and recover like the pros? Look no further than Junkyard Training, that not only offers specific strength and speed training, but also offers a plethora of recovery and rehab techniques like cryo, cupping, recovery boots, and so much more. Learn more today by visiting junkyardtraining.net or call 303-521-7594. Once again, visit junkyardtraining.net or call 303-521-7594 and get started today. And we are back and ready to wrap up this amazing episode. I always love doing this award season here, getting a ton of feedback from a ton of different people here, and looking ahead to the future of the sport, as well as recognizing those who have contributed so much to Colorado football here. And it is no different here on the 1A level. In no other award category quite summarizes like the Most Valuable Playmaker Award here, where, we have some serious talent, obviously, as well as our closest race on this episode here. And yeah, let's go ahead and talk about the candidates here who have all been so critical to the success of their squads here. And we're going to start off down on the Lahara side of things with Parker Burr of Centauri, who did substantial damage. This tailback ran for over 1,000 yards and 11 scores in a short burst to start the season. Not to mention defensively, he notched 65 tackles and 5 for loss, as well as 2 sacks, just especially on these classifications here on the 1A, 2A, 3A even level. These both side performers are absolutely critical to their team's success, and Parker Burr was no exception to that, with a very, very hot start with all of these contributions on both sides of the ball. And when he returned, it was like he didn't even miss a beat. Now, as for our next nominee here, we have another Forge Christian guy, like we could have anybody else here with an undefeated season. You gotta shout out Sullivan Strange here, the athlete here for Forge Christian, putting on an absolute clinic this season, going for almost 2,000 total yards between passing and running the football here. As far as rushing goes, notable 2-touchdown game against the Academy, as well as Prospect Ridge Academy, going for 409 yards and 7 scores on the season. but passing the football is where he was very clean, effective, and surgical. 25 touchdowns to just one interception, 1,452 yards with 4 touchdown performances against likes of Kent, Denver here, as well as a couple of other schools. He just looked pretty flawless throughout the season here, and if he couldn't get it done passing, he was getting it done rushing. And then defensively, notched 3 interceptions as well on that side of the ball against the likes of Wiggins, Devlin, and I want to say Denver Christian as well. So only 7 tackles, but those 3 picks, forcing turnovers, and then staying on the field to then utilize those turnovers on the offensive side of the ball. Huge, huge, huge looks for the likes of Sullivan Strange here, who's done everything that this program has asked him to do over the years here, and especially his senior year, leading them to an undefeated season. Now, panning over here is another dual-sided monster here, and that is Azaria Hurtado out of Monte Vista here. Not only is he one of, if not the leading receiver on the 1A level, he is also the leading interceptor on the 1A level here. 8 interceptions for 160 interception return yards, 5 pass deflections, 2 fumble recoveries as well for 10 total turnovers for Monte Vista, courtesy of Azaria Hurtado here. Those interceptions and 1 fumble recovery coming against a 43-20 win over North Fork. He also had 3 picks against Ignacio, and then 2 interceptions and a fumble recovery against Centauri in what would be a league-defining win here for this program. He also had 56 tackles, including huge 13 tackle performances against Alamosa and North Fork here, as well as a tackle for loss. And then offensively, really hard to cover this guy, super slippery, as evidenced by some insane games where he had 190 receiving yards and 5 receiving touchdowns against Rye High School. It's probably a little disrespectful to laugh, but holy cow, that means that all but 1 reception was in the end zone here for his big performance. He also had a 225-yard performance against Ignacio with a hat trick to boot, and a 126-yard performance against Centauri with 2 receiving touchdowns in that game for a cumulative 12 receiving touchdowns and 674 receiving yards on just 25 receptions. Very explosive, very dynamic, very dangerous junior there, athlete out of Monte Vista, Azaria Hurtado. And our last nominee here, he has been cracking in at this here. He actually was our newcomer of the year winner his freshman year, and that should let you know it's Casey Midcap here, his senior season, the 6'2", 180-pound Drake commit here, who passed for 1,000 yards with 15 touchdowns to just 1 pick, and ran for another 850 yards with 16 touchdowns here for a very impressive season. His most impressive rushing game against Goodland High School, that is an out-of-state opponent, 184 yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. And then as far as passing performances go, I'm going to go ahead and go with his most notable game being against Burlington. 10 of 10, 252 yards, 3 passing touchdowns. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that with a QBR of 177.1. Jump over to the defensive side of the ball, though. He has 38 tackles on the season, including a season-high 11 against Scott High School, a team that had gotten the better of Ray a couple times over the past few years from out of state. So put on for the Box State here, as well as a TFL. 2 TFLs against Lyman and Wiggins, games that, Ray has potentially not performed as well as they would have wanted to in the past, but have avenged since then, as well as a pick, 4 pass deflections, 2 forced fumbles, and a fumble recovery on the defensive side of the ball. So let's go ahead and take a look at you, the fans, here to see where we start off. Now, the fan vote here for this Most Valuable Playmaker award racked up a total of 467 votes, so that was the biggest poll out of all of them, which is always good to see that we are weighing in on who the most valuable playmaker is. And unfortunately, in the 4th spot is Parker Burr with 5% here, and Azaria Hurtado in 3rd place with 19%, and then the MVP was only decided by 2%, with the percentages being 39 and 37% in favor of Sullivan Strange of Forge Christian We saw in the other awards that Forge and Ray were showing up here, and it is no different in this one. But Forge barely gets the edge here with their candidate, Sullivan Strange, at 39% of those 467 votes. Thank you to everyone who voted. And if you want your voice to be heard, be sure to follow us on Twitter/X at Playmaker Corner, where we have polls going all the time, including 2A if you are listening to this episode, or 3A coming up soon. So that is Sullivan Strange, who is the fan most valuable playmaker of the 2024 season. But let's see if that is going to carry momentum into an overall win for Sullivan Strange. Now, once again, to give credit to our guy, Anthony Garcia here out of Mile High Prep Report, he is somebody who got direct eyes here and is going to cast his vote for Azaria Hurtado here of Monte Vista here. Obviously, a very historic season for this squad and a very historic athlete as well on both sides of the ball, being a threat to really cause headaches anytime he got his hands on it, whether he took it from the offense or whether he provided the playmaking on his own offense. And to actually develop a lead here, Phoenix is going to cast his vote for Azaria Hurtado, saying, quote, Casey Midcap, without a doubt, is the MVP for Ray, and is one of the most impressive QBs in 1A, but my vote goes to Hurtado since I find him to be the most valuable all-around player for Monte Vista and is a big swing player for them. Being a top receiver while also locking it down on defense with 8 interceptions, returning a kickoff, and punt for a touchdown on special teams, it just seems like there is nothing Hurtado can't do, and for that reason, he is my pick for MVP, end quote. And honestly, that lines up pretty well with Phoenix's overall takes as far as Playmaker of the Week goes, valuing every single aspect of the ball and something that he definitely brings to the table in his 1A segment. So be sure to check him out on the recaps as we are in the postseason here. So he's going to have a ton to talk about as far as the playoffs go, as well as predictions and whatnot. Shout out to Phoenix. Great job this year being basically our 1A coverage specialist here for Colorado tackle football. Moving along here, though, we have our 2A Colorado football expert here and specialist, but also the northern area expert, but also just a guy who knows ball here in Gideon here, and his vote is going to be for Casey Midcap, saying, quote, I feel bad for talking about Ray this much, however, it is warranted. The only player in 1A with a D1 commitment, Casey Midcap has been powerful for this squad. Since the first year I started here, when they made the 2022 championship and were leading linemen at half, I knew he and Meisner were special. What Midcap has done is given Ray something they can build on for years to come. I respect that. End quote. And his second place was Azaria Hurtado here. So very interesting votes here. But so far, that leaves the count at Sullivan Strange with 1, Hurtado with 2, Midcap with 1 as well. And to spice things up just a little bit here is going to be Gino with his vote on Sullivan Strange, saying, quote, I decided to go with Strange because he has led a Forge Christian team that was not really on many people's radars going into the season. He has the most total touchdowns in the state on an offense that has scored an obscene, that is in all caps, obscene amount of points this season. And Forge has not won many games this decade, so I'm going with Strange for bringing Forge Christian back into the forefront of Colorado high school football, end quote. So now that makes it a tie for Hurtado and Strange, and Midcap is actually going to tie it up as well with Coach V's vote, saying, quote, I remember when we first covered Casey all those years ago, and there were countless times since then where we said his time would be coming. We said it after he won our first ever 1A Newcomer of the Year award, after their first state championship loss, and last year after their heartbreaking playoff loss to Strasburg. After a great senior year regular season, I can confidently say his time is now, end quote. And so now that leaves just me, your showrunner and your host for the 1A awards episode here. And my vote for most valuable playmaker is going to come right after I recap the rest of the award winners. Yep, I'm going to make you wait. I'm going to make you think about who I'm going to vote for. But as a recap from the rest of the episode here, 1A Coach of the Year, Levi Kramer of Ray. 1A Newcomer of the Year, Camden Taha out of Lyman. 1A Defensive Playmaker of the Year is Dante Vigil of Forge Christian. And 1A Offensive Playmaker of the Year, Sam Meisner, unanimous Offensive Playmaker of the Year for Ray. And with all of that in consideration, looking at everything that these teams have accomplished this season, looking at all the capabilities of these squads here, I gotta go for 1A Most Valuable Playmaker of the 2024 season is going to be Casey Midcap out of Ray, Colorado here. This Eagle has flown far, far and away here. There's really nothing that he cannot do, and that is why he is a Division I football prospect here. And, I want to give a shout out as well to Azaria Hurtado here, who has had his share of playmaking on special teams. But you got to look at what Casey Midcap has done for the best team in the state, the number 1 seed, and that includes 5 rushing touchdowns against Goodland, a rushing touchdown and a kickoff return touchdown against Scott High School, who they struggled against. You got 2 rushing touchdowns against Holyoke, 1 punt return touchdown against Burlington, not to mention the perfect stat line that I mentioned earlier, and then 2 rushing, 1 rushing, 3 rushing to close the regular season on 9-0, not to mention his defensive capabilities, where he had 37 tackles, 5 for loss, a pick, 2 forced fumbles, and a fumble recovery, as well as 3 pass deflections. He's a 3-level impact defender, just like I talked about earlier with Jonathan Thompson. He is the offensive machine here with 26 total touchdowns on the season, 735 rushing yards, 945 passing yards, but not to mention his 388 kickoff return yards and 207 punt return yards. I mean, there's just nothing on a football field that this guy cannot accomplish here. 1,680 offensive yards, 595 special teams yards. That's over 2,000 yards here for this high impact guy. That's just a little bit more, I want to say, than Hurtado here. And it's on the number 1 team in the state that has not lost a game. And it brings us full freaking circle here on the Casey Midcap experience, who y'all the fans this was in the 2021 season, crowned him as the Newcomer of the Year at QB/DB, winning 50% of the vote here, and was definitely going to be the winner there as far as votes, back when we had a completely different looking cast and everything. But we keep it consistent here, and it is going to be an excellent story closing book for Casey Midcap to win Most Valuable Playmaker on the 1A level for the 2024 season. Now, to remind everybody of the overall awards here, the winners are Most Valuable Playmaker, Casey Midcap of Ray High School. Offensive Playmaker of the Year, Sam Meisner of Ray High School. Defensive Playmaker of the Year, Dante Vigil of Forge Christian. Newcomer of the Year, Camden Taha of Lyman. And Coach of the Year, Levi Kramer of Ray. Those are all the awards here. Thank you all so much for voting on the polls. Continue to vote on the polls and use your voice as we head through 2A, 3A, 4A, and 5A for our overall awards season. Now, before we go here and do our outro, we do have to talk about the All-PMC teams here. And yeah, that's going to be, I'm going to talk about the position limits and then say who we voted for. So for All-PMC here, we get 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 2 offensive tackles, 3 interior offensive linemen, 2 defensive tackles, 2 edge players, 2 linebackers, 3 corners, 2 safeties, 2 kickers, and 1 punter. And so to announce that on this show, I'm just going to work my way backwards. Punter, as crowned by Gideon here, is Augustin Hame here out of the Pinnacle. Our 2 kickers are Diego De Leon of Ray and Noah Arter of Forge Christian. Notice a pattern here on a lot of our award winners. Safety for All-PMC is Jonathan Thompson of Yuma and Talon Short of Platte Valley. At cornerback, Azaria Hurtado gets a nod here, as well as Adrian Carranza of Yuma and Tyler Sanders of Meeker. At linebacker, Dante Vigil of Forge Christian and Ira Sittner of Highland are our linebackers. At edge here, we got Brogan Palmer of Highland and Tavery Chapel of Ray. At defensive tackle, we got Ethan Maxwell of Forge Christian and Tavita Tanua of Ellicott. At interior offensive lineman, we got Graham Hunziker of Centauri, Richard Terrazas of Grand Valley, and Hudson Colner of Holyoke. At offensive tackle, we got Stevie Linton of Wiggins and Keegan Mellett of Lyman. At tight end, we got Knox Reed of Buena Vista. At wide receiver, we got Aaron Tina of Ray, Shane Savarek Jr. of Highland, Mikey Orovich out of CSCS. At running back, we got Eli Shukanecht out of Buena Vista and Jason Lewisberg out of Wiggins. At quarterback, we got Casey Midcap out of Ray and Sullivan Strange out of Forge Christian. And our athlete spot is going to go to Samuel Meisner out of Ray here. So those are the All-Playmaker teams. Feel free to look at the graphic wherever you find us on social media. And to wrap up the show, like I said, check us out on Instagram at Playmakers Corner, on Twitter/X at Playmaker Corner, where we got plenty more polls on the way. So go ahead and make your voice heard, as well as see all of our episode covers and graphics that we make for that. We're also on TikTok at Playmakers Corner as well, or on Facebook, Playmakers Corner. So please be sure to follow us on all of those, and please pay attention anywhere you listen to podcasts by turning on notifications. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. We're also on YouTube, so feel free to subscribe and make sure that notifications are turned on any of those platforms, whether you are following or subscribing, to make sure that you know when the latest episodes come out. Congratulations to all of the nominees, players, and everybody who is in consideration for any spot on All PMC or awards on a fantastic 2024 fall tackle football season here in the state of Colorado on the 1A classification level. Be sure to stay tuned as we recap playoffs in the 1A level, as well as the 2A, 3A, 4A, and 5A levels with different hosts every single week, as well as predictions and reactions to the playoff results that happened on the prior weekend, including this one from the past weekend that was super snowy and super backed up, that led to some crazy results through Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, as well as Friday. Thank you all to you listeners for staying out and supporting. I have been your host/showrunner for the 1A Awards episode, Cody Stauffer. Looking forward to the rest of this 2024 tackle football season. Peace.